Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about Roman ruins beneath the world's first cathedral. So the world's first cathedral was not St. John's, what was it called? Yeah, St. John Lateran Basilica. This was the first one that I guess is documented, and I'm pretty sure it's the first one definitely the first one that the Romans built. There might be some in the remote past that we haven't discovered yet, but yeah, this first cathedral was also the greatest and the biggest one until the other basilica was created, St. Peter's Basilica, which was a lot later. These British archaeologists, they've mapped using ground-penetrating radar and other technology, and literally crawling through these little crevices underneath where the site stands, this hidden world of Roman ruins. And I've done a few episodes about Roman ruins lying beneath other settlements or buildings or monuments, and also the reverse. So Roman buildings being built on top of old Persian sites. I did a video pretty recently, about a week ago, about this hill in northwest Palestine, northwest Israel, that was used by the Persians as sort of a staging area to invade Egypt, ancient Egypt, the dynastic Egypt, and not dynastic Egypt, the later kingdoms of Egypt. And the Romans also had used that site later and built some military encampments up there as well. And also the Temple of Jupiter, same thing. They built on top of an older site, a really old site that some people speculate goes back to the end of the last ice age, or the Younger Dryas time. Some people Some people dispute that. Anyway, the reason why people think that site, the Temple of Jupiter, and the site predating the Temple of Jupiter is so old is because they're giant monoliths that were cut in very with laser pinpoint precision. So anyway, my point is that the Romans have this huge tradition of building on top of old sites and notable places, notable buildings rather, that either other empires had built or the Romans themselves built and just repurposed. And that seems to be going on here. And I want to explore this tradition as well. Maybe there's some deeper, maybe it's not just convenience, although that seems to be the Occam's razor, right? It's just convenient for them to do it that way. And I think that definitely plays a huge role. But maybe there are other reasons as well that we'll go into in a second. So let's just talk about the actual site. So these British archaeologists, they use potholing techniques and laser instruments as they squirm their way through shafts and chambers 30 feet beneath the 17th century Basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome. So 30 feet underground, I guess, or even further than that, they're crawling, and that's scary. I don't know if you guys get claustrophobic easily, but just crawling in darkness, even walking around an old mine shaft, is really, really scary, and you're standing up there too. So these guys have a lot of balls. And also, a few episodes ago, I talked about some reasons that would deter people from exploring places that haven't been touched in hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years, because of curses, stagnant air, all kinds of different hazards. So these guys are doing the Lord's work here. So it shouldn't be pushed under the rug, their efforts, so to speak. So the present day now that stands now is on top of the old basilica founded by Constantine in 4th century AD. So around 360 or something like that is when the basilica was first built. But anyway, at that time, that's when the Roman Empire really embraced Christianity as the official religion, and started, I guess that also started the downfall of Rome as well as we knew it, because less than 100 years later, it turned into just the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. So anyway, I'm just filling in context here. The basilica was in turn built on top of a huge barrack. So the basilica built by Constantine was built on top of an older giant barracks that housed elite Roman imperial cavalry. So These guys aren't just any type of soldiers. These guys are, I guess, military nobility, if you wanna call it that, like the elite. They were treated differently. They had a lot of social and political sway. Because remember, a lot of these servicemen, a lot of them would become either senators or politicians afterward, when they would serve in Rome. So this barracks it's not just any barracks. It's very significant, and this is all on the Celian Hill of Rome, which I'll get into in a second. Rome, if you don't know, Rome was founded within its walls, the original Rome, by Romulus and Remus. There are 7 hills in that part of Rome that eventually became Rome proper, ancient Rome. Now I think now they're just walled off archaeological sites now, for at least the Palatine Hill. The Palatine Hill is the one in the center. Anyway, I'll get into that in a second. Beneath the barracks, archaeologists explored yet another layer of Roman ruins. So let's just do a quick count for a second. We have the modern day basilica, then we have the older basilica, then we have the huge barracks, and then now we have a villa that was underneath the barracks. And they don't go over any dates, which I think they're probably in the process of doing. But this first layer of Roman ruins was a villa decorated with frescoes, some of them marked with graffiti left by Roman soldiers and military engineers. And here's the interior of what the 4th century basilica looked like right here. It looks beautiful. It looks like what you would expect to look like. So anyway, these legionnaires recorded their names and units as they dismantled the villa. So we know that there was a villa there, but the remnants of the villa are when they were dismantling it. So it's not the beginning of when the villa was started. It's toward the end of the villa's life. And a villa back then is probably like bigger than Disneyland or something, like acres and acres of land. So legionnaires do what they usually do. They cart off the marble and other materials that made up the old building, and then they repurpose it in the construction of what became the giant barracks. And then so they wrote their names. There's graffiti. So there's a sketch of an ostrich hunt, which probably took place in the nearby Colosseum. So around this time, there was a famous, I guess at the time, there was a famous story of Emperor Commodus. Commodus, if you guys, I guess in pop culture, in modern pop culture, if you guys seen the movie Gladiator, what's his name? Russell Crowe. Commodus was played by Joaquin Phoenix. He was like the main bad guy, and that's who they're talking about. So he was a crazy emperor, and he also liked to fight animals in the Colosseum for fun. And that is probably where the graffiti came from, because it's a well-known story that he used to fight against these giant ostriches and other animals and cut off their heads and all that stuff. I don't know if that's like a true story, but it seems to be talked about in many different sources, so there's got to be some sort of nugget of truth in there. But yeah, they found graffiti that may have been a depiction of him in action underneath his villa. So Professor Ian Haynes, who's a co-director of this effort, it was a 5-year research effort, by the way. So they were doing this for 5 years. He says they're very difficult to access places. They're dark passageways where you're working on your stomach. Getting the laser scanners into position in such narrow, confined spaces is complicated, which is probably why it took so long. In some places, it was necessary to rotate the teams on a half-hourly basis, because otherwise it just becomes stifling. So you can only lay in there 30 minutes at a time before you start, I don't know, your foot falls asleep, your back starts hurting, whatever it is, your neck. So this is really painstaking work, guys. Using laser instruments and ground-penetrating radar, the team produced 3D digital reconstructions of what the early basilica and the cavalry barracks would have looked like. Both were large complexes which sat on top of Celian Hill. I think that's how you say it. Celian or Calian? I think it's Celian, though. One of Rome's 7 hills and would have dominated the ancient city. The barracks, the name was called Castra Nova, or New Fort, and it accommodated those hundreds of elite soldiers and their horses and the people who take care of the horses. It was a giant military complex, which was built under Septimius Severus, who is also another famous emperor. I think he belongs to the Claudian line. I'm not sure, though. I don't know. I don't know why I said that. I don't want to confuse you guys. Anyway, there was another identical barracks located a short distance away. which housed the imperial cavalry. I thought this was interesting. So it was built like that because they could not plot against the emperor as one unit. So I guess they were that paranoid of there being some sort of military coup against the emperor or something like that. I don't know. I guess you can't be too careful, right? If you're the emperor of 200 AD Rome era. That's pretty much the story. There are all these levels, and I talked about the Temple of Jupiter, and a lot of things that the Romans did have been speculated that they weren't the first. Like, these weren't original ideas made by the Romans. Like, they were inspired by somebody else older than they were to do these practices. And it makes a lot of sense to have this sort of, I don't want to call it superstition, but I guess that's a pretty close word for it, or I guess a carried on tradition, if you want to call it that, of building on top of these old centers. And part of the reason why they did that might, again, like I mentioned earlier, convenience. They might have thought there was some sort of quality of that location on the earth that you couldn't get elsewhere in other locations. Like maybe there was some sort of something that they can inherit just by building on top of that area. Let's say, for instance, the Romans decided to dismantle the pyramids or something and repurpose it. They would probably build a giant, either a cathedral or some place of huge significance, maybe a monument on top of it, because if you guys have seen the pyramids in real life, you there's a feeling that comes over you, kind of like if you see a giant building. But I think it's a lot different with the pyramids just because it's way older, and so that essence persists just because of the land it was sitting on. So if you build something on top of it, that essence would theoretically carry over. So this might be a reason why the Romans would do something like this. Another reason is more logistical. So what the Persians did, like a staging area, it gives a tactical advantage. There's a lot of different reasons. So before I end this video, I want to talk about actually Rome itself. So this is the Tiber River here. The story goes with, let me read this excerpt here. Tradition holds that Romulus and Remus founded the original city on the Palatine Hill on April 21st, 753 BC. So here's this right here, Palatine Hill. And that the Seven Hills were first occupied by small settlements. So they weren't originally Romans, the people outside the Palatine Hill. They were not grouped nor recognized as a city called Rome. The Seven Hills denizens began to interact, which began to bond the groups. Now, I wish there was more detail in this. Like, what exactly was there? Was it like a Genghis Khan type of thing where he just destroyed everybody who didn't join him, or what? And has this been a little bit whitewashed, or was there a common enemy that they united to go up against? Either way, the city of Rome came into being, and then they built that this boundary here, this wall. It became Rome proper. The Seven Hills denizens began to interact and it bonded the groups, like I just said. So they drained the marshy valleys between them. So I guess between all these hills, it was all marshy and unusable land. And that would explain why the people on the different hills or the settlements didn't immediately come together, which makes a lot of sense to me. And then they turned them into markets, which is very interesting, or fora in Latin. Later, in the early 4th century BC, the Servian walls were constructed to protect the Seven Hills. That's very interesting. They're called the Servian walls. Every time you would enter Rome, when you left and entered the zone, especially in the town center of Rome, I forget what it's called. It escapes me right now. I don't want to look it up. I think it was forbidden to carry weapons in there, or there was something like if you committed a crime within that boundary, you could be sentenced to death. Like they had all kinds of rules. So the whole founding of Rome itself is such an interesting tale, because Romulus and Remus, they actually came from Aeneas, who fought in the Trojan War, and the losers of the Trojan War had to escape, and then eventually those descendants became Romulus and people who became Rome proper. So anyway. Oh yeah, this is Celian Hill right here on the very west. Very interesting. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this video about Rome, about construction, levels of construction, building on top of everything else, and then also, are there any points like on the Earth? Here's another thing. I don't have a graphic of it, but it's been, I don't know if it's New Agey or if it comes from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, or if it's Egyptian mythology or something like that. But anyway, apparently there's a grid. If you imagine the planet Earth as a grid, then there are a lot of points of peculiarity. So Stonehenge is on one node on the grid. The pyramids are on another. Göbekli Tepe is on another. All kinds of Washington D.C. is on one. The Mayan pyramid of the Temple of Man. All of these points of interest are on specific nodes. So maybe the Romans were thinking something along those lines and built on top of older buildings that were resting on these nodes for whatever reason, to capture some sort of attribute or some sort of essence, like I mentioned earlier. So if you guys know anything about like that, there's probably a word for it. I can't believe I can't recall it right now. But these nodes, these points of interest, if you guys know about anything about that, let me know. And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.